welcome back, everybody. So we are covering a very special set of trials here, memorable trials from 2018. And we just covered the William Riley Gall trial, and now we're moving in to the George Burch trial out of Wisconsin. You might remember that he was on trial for the 2016 murder of Nicole Vanderheiden. This is the trial that we're about to cover. In the 12 p.m. hour, we're going to be covering the Tex MacGyver trial. He was accused of killing his wife, but was it an accident? In the 2 p.m. hour, we're going to be moving on to the Daniel Villegas case, a trial saga where this man was on trial 3 times. And in the trial that we covered, the one that you're going to see, it had one of the most dramatic conclusions we've ever seen in a courtroom. And in the 3 p.m. hour, we're going to move into the trial of Quentin Tellis, the murder mystery of Jessica Chambers. Who killed this young 19-year-old girl? That becomes the question. Was it Quentin Tellis or somebody else? Right now, though, we're going to focus on George Burch. As I said, he was on trial for the murder of Nicole Vanderheiden. It was claimed that he violently beat, sexually assaulted, and strangled her with a cord. He claimed, though, that he wasn't the killer, that it was really Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's boyfriend, her live-in boyfriend. And really, Nicole went out with her friends that night, and Douglas, and later on she was found dead. The question it becomes, who did this? And right now, the great place to start would be from the boyfriend himself, Douglas Dietrich, claiming that he had nothing to do with Nicole's murder. But let's see how he did on the stand.
Do you recall her sending you a text saying, quote, "Yup, I learned lots"?
Yep.
And, quote, "Why else you so fucking retarded"?
Yeah.
Do you recall responding to that text message?
I don't know what text I specifically responded to at what point, but I did respond back here and there, when I did look at my phone and noticed that she was still, texting me, and I don't know at what point I tried calling her too. And
do you recall if any of your responses to her text messages were angry responses?
No.
Do you recall using a vulgar language with her in response?
No.
And why did you not respond in a vulgar or upset way?
Well, I wasn't upset, and I think I just kind of thought she was upset for an unknown reason, and there wasn't really a reason for it.
And in fact, is it fair to say your responses were, you mentioned LOL or LOL, stop it, Nikki?
Yep.
And then just saying that you would be there soon or find her?
Yep, I'd be there at the sardine can or whatever. I'll be there soon.
Do you recall if the derogatory text messages then continued even after that?
I believe they did, yes.
And at any point in response to those messages, did you get upset with Nikki?
No, I didn't.
In fact, at one point she did send a text message that said, "You hurt me all the time."
Yes, she did.
Okay, let's break this down right now with law enforcement expert and fellow host here on the Law and Crime Network, Vincent Hill. Vincent, great to see you and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Jesse. Good morning.
Good morning. When we cover this case, I remember when we covered it, the idea is, doesn't the investigation always first center on the boyfriend? I mean, clearly this guy is an interesting character. I'm curious about the way he was investigated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's be clear here, Jesse. About 95% of these types of murders, she was murdered in a very personal way, if you will. She was strangled. She was beaten. Ties to someone the victim usually knows. So, of course, investigators are going to look in the home first. And then you add these text messages the night of the murder. And investigators had what is a very dangerous thing in an investigation initially, and that's called tunnel vision, because they keyed in on the boyfriend and the father of her small child, and they really didn't look for any other evidence in this case, Jesse. Well,
let's talk about some of the things that they might have had against them. Wasn't there evidence of an attack outside of their home?
Yeah, so there was definitely some blood-type evidence outside the home or near the home where Nicole was killed. So, of course, investigators looked at that. And, of course, when you're looking at blood evidence or anything like that, and the fact that a homicide has occurred, then that's where investigators want to key that investigation in on. So initially, yes, it did appear that the boyfriend, Douglas Dietrich, had everything to do with this homicide.
And, you know, and a little bit later, we're going to show more of his testimony where he doesn't seem to be that concerned, Vincent, about where she disappeared to.
Right. Yeah, and that was very troubling when I was watching the trial, Jesse. You know, here's, you know, the mother of your small child, but you kind of appear like you don't care where she is or what's going on with her. So that definitely didn't play well to the jury. It definitely didn't make Douglas Dietrich look like the ideal boyfriend or ideal father.
Yeah, because there's a separation between, hey, I'm a bad boyfriend, I don't really concern, we got to fight, and I'm trying to cover something up. It's kind of suspicious. And that becomes this kind of dual situation in this case. But George Burch, despite overwhelming evidence pointing the finger at him, he claimed that Douglas Dietrich was the one who killed Nicole. We'll talk more about it on the upside of this break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. And welcome back, everybody. We're talking about some of the most memorable trials from this past year in 2018. And how could we not talk about George Burch? This trial out of Wisconsin, he was on trial for the brutal murder of Nicole Vanderheiden. But this case split people's opinions. Some people thought George Burch did this. Other people thought someone else did this, including Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's live-in boyfriend. And that became the question, who ultimately killed this young woman? Douglas Dietrich was called to the stand and denied having anything to do with Nicole's murder. I want to continue on with his testimony where he talks about what did he do when Nicole went missing. You might recall that she got into a fight with Douglas the night of her murder, that they were all out at a bar. She got angry, she left, they got into a bad fight. What was he doing during all this time? Let's see.
That kind of when you started to get going for your day at that point?
Yeah.
Pretty late to sleep in by normal standards, but
Yeah.
how were you feeling that day?
Not good. I was pretty hungover, dehydrated, and
Did you make any attempts to contact Nikki at that point?
no, I don't believe so at that point. 'Cause I woke up again. Dylan was, he woke me up again when he was laying in bed with me, and I got him seated in his high chair and warmed him up some baby food, and because this was right when he had just turned 6 months and he was transitioning from the breast milk to some of the baby foods, and actually I think he was on his second week of that, and trying some new things and mixing bananas and all that stuff up in it. And I remember making myself some mac and cheese and eating that.
By the time you then found your phone in your bed, you kind of up and about, getting going a little bit there?
Yep. And then I was really getting concerned at that point, and then I tried contacting Nikki and everybody that at that point, making calls and texts.
Again, who are you contacting then once you get your phone in order to try to get things rolling to find Nikki?
I contacted Greg, my parents, I contacted Dallas, and then we did, wondered if, I think Dallas had mentioned if she was in jail, checked the jail records, did an inmate search to see if she was possibly in jail, and then asked Heather to ask her mom if she could call the hospitals to see if she was at the hospital or anything like that, and I said something I wouldn't be able to call for HIPAA rights, and that her parents should, and called my parents and said, I don't have my car here, and I had told Greg to come over to give me a ride to my car, and said we gotta try and find Nikki here. And
did you make attempts to contact Nikki directly as well during that point in time?
Yeah, I believe I sent her a text, and maybe, I think tried calling her, and her phone was still off and went directly to voicemail.
Okay, Vincent, let's see. What do you think about Douglas's steps to investigate what happened to Nicole Vanderheiden?
Well, Jesse, I guess on the surface it appears that he was genuinely concerned. He started sending Facebook messages. He says he couldn't find his phone. I don't know why, but he had been drinking the night before. So he was going through the motions of someone that was actually looking for Nicole that night. But the thing that struck me as odd is he said, well, I still didn't feel too good, so I took a nap. I napped for a little bit, then I got up, and then I finally found my phone. So if I'm a juror sitting in that jury box, I'm going to say, well, were you really concerned that your girlfriend, the mother of your child, was missing, if you had time to take a nap, whether you had been drinking the night before or not, you actually took a nap. You didn't go out. You didn't get in a car. Even though his car wasn't there, you didn't tell someone to come pick you up to go look for her. Those are the things I would ask as a juror, Jesse.
But isn't the flip side argument, everybody gets into fights with their loved ones, and maybe you just don't care where that person is the next day. You want a time to cool off. Isn't that another way of looking at it?
Yeah, that's definitely one way to look at it, but keep in mind they had a very small child together, that they were living together, raising that child together. So at some point, you would be concerned for that other parent to say, hey, where's this person at? Because you heard he was feeding the baby, he was doing this. He had been drinking that night. So at some point, you're going to say, where's the other parent at? So, yeah, you can look at it both ways, but it doesn't look good. We're
talking so much about Douglas Dietrich, we can't forget the fact that George Burch is the defendant. Now, he is claiming that he was framed, that he had sex with Nicole that night, met her at a bar, when he was knocked in the head by Douglas Dietrich. And when he woke up from being unconscious, Nicole was dead, and that he says Douglas is the murderer. I want to turn now to his testimony because, yes, we saw Douglas Dietrich take the stand. Let's move in to when the defendant himself took the stand and explained what he thinks really happened that night. Take a look.
And you said the bartender, I think you said her name was Brandy, had your drink ready when you got there?
Yes, sir.
And what did you say your drink was again?
Jack and Coke.
So you were drinking on this night?
Yes, sir.
Did you go alone to
Yes, sir.
So why did she have you pull over on the right? Do you know?
I don't know why she picked that exact spot to pull over. No, sir.
Did you have the impression you had arrived at her residence?
Yes, sir.
Did you go in her residence?
No, sir.
Why not?
She said there was a light on and she thought the babysitter was still up.
So you never went inside the residence?
No, sir. I've never been in the residence.
She had you pull over on the side of the road?
The right side of the road, yes, sir.
Mr. Burch, just a reminder to speak nice and loud. Can the jury hear the witness all right? Okay. Go ahead, Attorney Stebbins.
You did pull over?
Yes, sir.
What happened after that?
We sat there and talked for a few minutes.
Okay. What happened after that?
Started fooling around, messing around a little bit. Started kissing.
And at this point, you were still in the driver's seat?
Yes, sir.
She was still in the front passenger seat?
Yes, sir.
And I don't want to get into too many details, but you said you were fooling around?
Yes, sir.
What does that mean to you?
Kissing. I was kissing her neck a little bit, touching each other.
Did you guys stay in the front seat?
No, sir.
Where'd you go?
The back seat, the Blazer.
How did you get into the back seat?
I got out of the driver's side and walked around to the back passenger.
Do you remember how she got in the back seat?
I don't remember if she got out, hopped in the back, or if she just climbed over.
Okay, that is the defendant. And remember, he was on trial for allegedly violently beating, sexually assaulting, and strangling Nicole Vanderheiden. Vincent, is his story consistent with the evidence that we've seen so far? I'm curious about your take on meeting this woman at the bar and then going back and fooling around with her when you're going to hear the next part of it later on about that he became the victim himself at the hands of Douglas Dietrich.
I mean, Jesse, so far you could argue that it is consistent. I mean, listen, we've probably at some point in our lives been to a bar where you strike up a conversation with someone. Not something I would do where I would take someone home from the bar, but we know people do that. So right now his story is actually pretty believable that, hey, I met this young lady at the bar. We were talking relationships. She said, hey, take me home. It has happened, Jesse. So I think that's why George Burch came up with that defense.
I wonder if it's believable that she was in that bar by herself and she would just take this guy outside of her home where she knew Douglas Dietrich would be. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll cover some more of this testimony and recap a lot more of this trial. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law&Crime, everybody. We're recapping the George Burch trial, the murder of Nicole Vander Heiden back in 2016. Who did it? Was it George Burch, the defendant, or was it Douglas Dietrich, the victim's boyfriend? Now, according to George Burch, and we played you a little bit of his testimony when he took the stand, he had met Nicole out one night at a bar. They went back outside of her place, started fooling around, when bam, he gets hit in the head, gets knocked out, wakes up and sees Nicole's body. He claims that he was knocked out by Douglas Dietrich and that Douglas Dietrich killed Nicole and then forced George Burch to dispose of the body at gunpoint. We're going to see if the story makes sense, but let's play a little bit more of George Burch on the stand explaining the details of what happened. Take a look.
So at some point, I think what you're saying is her feet are on the ground, but you're still holding her by her armpit?
Right, I'm holding her up, and her feet are more, if I'm standing this way, I dropped her feet, and she was kind of like, we were at a little bit of an angle at the, I'd say the beginning, of where it starts to go down, just where the ground descends down.
You said at some point you're facing Dietrich?
Yes, sir.
What's going on at that point?
He was basically telling me to put her down and put her in that area, or place her in the area where I was, and he was instructing me on what to do.
So if her feet are on the ground, as you described, and yet you still have to move her body, are you essentially dragging her?
When I had let her go, he had pretty much stopped, and I was at the area pretty much where I had been instructed to let her go at.
Okay, I'm back here with Vincent Hill. Vincent, we can't have two versions of these stories be together and make sense. Either Douglas Dietrich is lying or George Burch is lying. We've heard the testimony from both of them. What do you think?
Right. Well, Jesse, I got to tell you, I did not believe George Burch there on the stand for several reasons. I've been married twice. Listen, if I came home and my wife was having sex with another man in my driveway, do you think I'm going to kill my wife and then let a witness to that murder leave unscathed, i.e. not be killed himself? Not likely. And George testified to some of the things that I found strange. Oh, I wanted to put my seatbelt on. Who thinks about putting a seatbelt on when they have a gun to the back of their head, Jesse? I mean, his story, the bar part, you could say, yeah, that's believable. They met at a bar. But this whole thing, oh, I got knocked out. I came to. She was behind the truck. He put her in the truck. He told me to drive around. I couldn't put my seatbelt on. To me, Jesse, is just not believable.
It seems, like you said, everything could be credible until when he's knocked out. Because maybe that's, again, if you believe that George Burch did this, took her back to the car, sexually assaulted her, killed her, things took a bad turn. But right when he gets knocked out, wasn't there no evidence of any injury to his head? And if he's getting hit on the head where he's unconscious and he's asleep the entire time this murder happens, something doesn't add up.
Yeah, something doesn't add up. There was no evidence whatsoever that he had taken a blow to the head. And not only that, I don't believe there was any evidence that Doug Dietrich was actually in that truck. I mean, there's touch DNA, there's fibers, all of these things that could have been found inside that truck. Why would Doug Dietrich get inside that truck knowing that he's going to leave his fingerprint, if you will, inside that vehicle? Because this wouldn't have been a planned homicide. He wouldn't have had on latex gloves or anything like that. This would have been a crime of passion. So he wouldn't have been thinking about hiding evidence or hiding the fact that he was in that truck.
Then you got to explain it to me. If none of this is true, if this is all a lie, how could his defense team mount this defense? How could they put him on the stand and have him tell this story?
Yeah, I think they thought maybe the jury would buy this. You know, they knew they had these text messages between Nicole and Douglas that didn't seem to fare too well for him. It painted him as this lying, this cheating guy who didn't really care about Nicole. So I think they really thought the jury would buy this, Jesse, that, again, she was in the bar, she was intoxicated, she met this guy who seemed to be a nice guy, and that was it.
Yeah, and it's not like he's coming forward and saying, hey, I woke up, she was dead, I don't know who did this. He is directly pointing the finger at Douglas Dietrich. Is that, from your sense, too convenient? It's not like it's a third party. Oh, I'm going to point right at the boyfriend.
Yeah, it's very convenient. I mean, who else would society and a jury and maybe even investigators, as we know, believe did this but the boyfriend? So I think the defense in itself, as outlandish as it is, was a very smart defense.
Well, I'll tell you what, we kind of did our own little cross-examination of George Burch, but when we come back, we're going to play the actual cross-examination of this witness, and we'll also reveal to you the verdict. We'll be right back. And welcome back, everybody. We're coming to the conclusion of the George Burch trial. Where we last left off, he had taken the stand in his own defense and said that he wasn't the one who killed Nicole Vanderheiden, that it was really Douglas Dietrich, Nicole's boyfriend, who did this, that he was merely having sex with her in a car outside of her house when, bam, he gets hit in the head, he's knocked unconscious, and he sees Nicole's lifeless body, and Douglas is the one who did this. Now, you can imagine that when George Burch was cross-examined by the state, things got pretty interesting. Take a look.
Part of your not gentle sexual activity that you had with her, right?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
That was all a result of your not gentle sexual activity that you had with her?
If that's the way you would put it, yes, sir.
I think that's the way you put it.
It wasn't gentle, no.
It was painful.
That I don't know.
Painful because it wasn't consensual, right?
No, sir, that's not true.
What really happened was you drove Nicole home 20 miles away from where you lived, fully expecting that you were going to have sex, right? That was your expectation. You were going to have sex. That's why you're driving her home, right?
I was hoping that we would. It was leading from what had happened before and where we had spoken. It seemed like that's what was going to happen.
And when you get there, and it becomes clear that Nikki isn't going to have sex with you, when she attempts to go into her house and leave your vehicle, that's when your mood changes, right?
No, sir.
That's when things get aggressive, don't they?
Not at all.
That's when you grab that cord and strangle her, don't you?
No, sir, not at all.
That's when Nikki gets slammed on the ground repeatedly when she's trying to run toward her house, when those bloodstains lead in a direction back to her home.
None of that is true.
Well, how do you know? You were out cold when Nikki was assaulted.
Because you said I did it.
Nikki was strangled. She had a fractured jaw, correct?
I don't know, sir. That's what the medical examiner said. But I can't speak for sir. I'm not a doctor.
You heard all of that, right?
Yes, sir.
You saw her injuries. You sat through court to see the defensive injuries to her hands, to her feet, to her palms, to her fingernails, that she fought for her life, right?
According to what the doctor said, yes.
Oh, a good cross-examination is pretty amazing to watch. Now, Vincent, you just saw this. That was pretty interesting to see, that back and forth, because clearly the state is not having any of his story.
Yeah, absolutely. They weren't having any of his story, and they kept pressing him, and you can see George Burch get agitated there. And one of the things that the state put on was her defensive wounds. And keep in mind, when Douglas was arrested, he didn't have these defensive wounds. So it goes back to who really did this. Was it Douglas? Was it George? You know, if she put on a fight the way that the medical examiner said, then I believe Douglas Dietrich would have had some type of injuries to his person and say he did.
You know, Vincent, one of the reasons this is such a memorable trial is there was a lot of evidence put in, including Fitbit data. The prosecution put in Fitbit data to show that Douglas Dietrich was sleeping at the time of the murder. I'm curious, what were your thoughts on that evidence coming in?
Well, you know, Jesse, that evidence is still fairly new in trials, but I think it helped to his defense, Douglas Dietrich's defense. Not only was there no real physical evidence tying him to it, like, again, no defensive wounds or anything like, or should I say offensive wounds to his body, but the Fitbit data actually showed that he was indeed upstairs in his house asleep, like he said, like he testified to. So I think that actually helped. And I think as technology evolves, we're going to see more of this, not just relying on DNA evidence, but electronic evidence as well, Jesse.
Yep, you're definitely right about that. Let's see how it happened. Let's see what happened in this case, though. You heard the testimony from George Burch and Douglas Dietrich, two completely different narratives. What did the jury ultimately come back with? Well, we're going to have to show you the verdict in a second, but as Vincent said, technology became a big issue. Did they buy into that Fitbit data? Let's see.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've been advised that you've reached a verdict. Is that correct? Then if you would pass the verdict forms over to the bailiff. State of Wisconsin versus George Stephen Burch, Brown County Case 16 CF 1309. The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant, George Stephen Burch, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, is charged in the information. It is signed by our foreperson and dated this first day of March 2018. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this your verdict? They are saying yes and shaking their heads. Does either party wish to have the jury polled?
Yes, Judge.
All right. There's a right to have the jury polled at this time, and this is how it will work. The juror right to the left of the bailiff. If that is your verdict, just you may say, yes, this is my verdict. If not, you can answer, no, this is not my verdict, and we'll just go down the row and around. So, is this your verdict?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have one last instruction to read to you. Your service in this case is completed. And on behalf of the court, our court staff, and the citizens of Brown County, we greatly appreciate your service and the personal sacrifice that you've made in fulfilling your duties as responsible citizens. You have been a very attentive and patient jury. We thank you for your service. We hope that you will look back on this experience as a very positive one. You do not have to answer any questions about this case now from anyone other than the court.
Okay, that guilty verdict, and you see the reaction from the family of Nicole Vanderheide, and you saw the reaction of Douglas Dietrich there as well. Vincent, you know, this was a very interesting case to follow, and clearly the jury didn't believe George Burch's side of it. But this is just chapter one. I know that he is going to appeal this ruling, and some of the things that they may be looking at to appeal, one of them is the evidence that was collected, including his cell phone. I'm not sure if you had a chance to see the question there, but the idea was that his cell phone data was captured during a hit-and-run incident that happened prior to this whole situation, and they kept on to that data and looked into it in relation to this murder, and the defense lawyers were saying that was an illegal search of his phone. He only handed over that phone for the hit and run. It had nothing to do with this case. I'm curious your thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, Jesse, if they didn't get a warrant, per se, to search his cell phone data for this particular crime, then it could be very well argued that that was an illegal search of his data there. But keep in mind, Jesse, there's a small part of this that actually tied back to George Burch, and that was DNA later found on part of Nicole's clothing. So they can argue that it was an illegal search, which may lead to a different trial, a new trial, if you will. But you cannot escape the DNA evidence in this case, Jesse.
You know, you're 100% right, Vincent, and that's a big point. It was the cell phone evidence, it was the testimony, it was the blood evidence. This is all becomes a big issue, and clearly the jury decided that one way or another. Vincent, I appreciate you coming on with me. I want to let all of our viewers know that I will be signing off, but Bob Bianchi is coming on next, and he's going to guide you through the next trial in our memorable trial day, and that, of course, is the Claude Tex MacGyver trial, one of the most infamous trials from last year. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back Stay tuned here on Law and Crime.